Hi everyone, welcome to our June Book Club's Favorites event, where we'll be discussing Brooke Lea Foster's newest novel, On Gin Lane. We are joined today by the author Brooke, an award-winning journalist whose articles have appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post magazine, and the Atlantic, among others. She is the author of 3 nonfiction books and the novel Summer Darlings. We are also joined by Brooke's editor, Hannah Broughton, and our publicity expert, Lauren Truskowski, to lead the conversation. Before we get into our discussion, I just want to let everyone watching know that 10 lucky viewers could win a hardcover copy of On Gin Lane and a paperback of Summer Darlings. To enter for your chance to win, just leave a question for us in the comment section of this video, and we will do our best to answer as many questions as possible live on screen today. And now on to book club. Brooke, would you mind telling us a little bit about your wonderful novel, On Gin Lane?
Yes. Hi, everybody. I'm so excited to be here. So, On Gin Lane follows Everly Farrow. She's a young socialite from Manhattan, and her fiance whisks her off to the Hamptons in the summer of 1957. And when they get there, she thinks she's arriving for the weekend, and he actually gifts her an early wedding present of an oceanfront hotel in Southampton. Um, and she is shocked by it, and she's excited but also a little ambivalent because he announces at that moment that they're going to stay for the entire summer, which she was not prepared for. She didn't even pack anything more than a swimsuit and a couple pairs of shorts. And they have this grand glamorous opening party at the hotel where Arthur Miller and Marilyn Monroe attend, and all the who's who of who was in the Hamptons that summer. And that night when they go to bed, the hotel burns to the... So On Gin Lane is the story of not just the mystery of who started the fire or what happened to this hotel, but it's also about Everly finding her voice, distancing herself from her family money, and really figuring out who she is at a time when women were not encouraged to find their own way. So that's really what it's about. We say it's a beach read with teeth, right, ladies?
It's the best kind of beach read.
Absolutely, yes.
So I guess to get us started, I would just love to hear what your sort of inspiration was to write this book, and where you got started, and what was your sort of like kernel of inspiration for it.
Yeah, it's funny because writers, we get our ideas in such interesting ways. And I was in the middle of researching a piece of information for my first novel, Summer Darlings. So I was trying to figure out, if you were a young society woman in 1962 from New York and you were traveling to Chicago, which hotel would you stay at? Because these are the things we have to do as historical fiction writers, right? We have to get those little details right. And I found out that it was the Palmer House Hotel on the Chicago Loop. But when I started doing some research about that hotel, I realized it had this really storied past. So Potter Palmer, it really is a tongue twister, was a wealthy Chicago businessman back in 1871. And he built this really grand, beautiful hotel, similar to what we know as the Plaza in New York, and gifted it to his socialite fiancee, Bertha, as an early wedding present. 13 days later, that hotel burned to the ground. So that little nugget, I just found it so interesting. And I thought, gosh, I want to come back to this and use this if I ever write a second novel, because here I am still, fully working out Summer Darlings. So when Summer Darlings was done, I pulled that little nugget back out, and I thought, you know what, I want to use that to build an entire story around. And I knew from the beginning that I wanted my character, Everly, to be a woman who had everything on the outside. She grew up at the Plaza Hotel herself. She, has this quote unquote perfect fiance. She grew up with everything a girl could want. But I wanted her to be someone who had a lot of problems and challenges in her life. So, for example, her mother, I immediately made sure that her mother was, that she was somebody who had a lot of issues. So she's in and out of a mental institution, and she has this broken engagement that she's trying to recover from. And luckily she does meet this other guy, but her mother's happiness sort of hinges on this wedding. So she's coming into this moment with a lot on her plate. So even though she seems like someone who you're like, wow, she's getting this hotel and she has this great fiance, she's actually filled with a deep longing and a deep unhappiness for more that I think really is what the book's about. So
I feel like you mentioned like the little cameos of the famous people who were in there.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to know how you, I mean, like, I think the late 50s are such an interesting time because they're just on the cusp of this like traditional sort of post-war, like everything is locked down and very proper, and you're about to go into the 1960s. So like how, like what made you decide to set it then? And how
Right.
did you like research how to make that time ring true?
Yeah. So I really wanted, I knew I wanted to set it at mid-century because I just love that era. I love the clothes and I love learning about, the food and women's roles back then. But I picked the summer of 1957 specifically because I knew I wanted to transfer that idea of this hotel in Chicago out to the Hamptons. And Arthur Miller and Marilyn Monroe were very famously out there that summer. It was their happiest summer as a married couple. They were seen around town biking, holding hands, and she would drive real slow through East Hampton in her convertible with two little dogs yapping around the back. And I just thought it would just be so fun to have them in the story. And as a historical fiction writer, you're always trying to immediately help your reader place themselves back in time. So if you go to a party in chapter 2 and Arthur Miller and Marilyn Monroe are there, you know exactly where you are in time, right? Jackie Kennedy's there too. And these are the times that Jackson Pollock was out there making his splatter paintings, and Jasper Johns is out there, Willem de Kooning and their, artist wives, Lee Krasner and Grace Hardigan, they were all there. So it was just a really interesting time in the place where I wanted to set it. And then, when you're writing historical fiction, so much is figuring out the mindset of the characters you're writing about. So I knew I wanted, Everly to come from this world where she had all of these pressures on her. To understand women in the 50s, I often say you have to go back to the 40s because, their mothers were women who their husbands went off to war, many of them, and many of them went into the workplace. And then their husbands came back and they were forced back into the home. And then these women, their daughters were suddenly forced to earn a Mrs. degree and be the happy homemaker and really settle themselves into that life. And Everly wants more than that. My main character, I positioned her at this specific time because she had so much pressure to return, to go out to the suburbs, to buy a home, get married, have a family. But this summer, particularly the moment that she meets Marilyn Monroe, and Marilyn Monroe kind of delivers this very pivotal piece of information that sends her on an unexpected journey that summer, she sort of realizes she's seeing all around her. So did that answer your question?
How did you, yeah, no, I just, it's
Okay.
such an,
Okay.
I always like things that are sent around that time because of exactly that, because you have to write an interesting book. I think you have to dive so deeply into the psyches of all of the different generations that are
Yeah,
sort of
you
in
do.
play.
And then you have to get so many things right. I mean, I love the fashion. So I mean, it's so much fun when you're writing a book to put, to dress your character. So there's one part where they're on the beach and my character's wearing, a strapless bathing suit with the gold buttons and the stripes on the bodice, and then what are they drinking? Are they drinking the lime rickeys? Are they drinking a grasshopper, which were those awful green drinks with, made from vermouth, and, all that stuff is fun. And I often say with historical fiction, I think I'm drawn to it in part because of my background as a journalist. I'm so used to researching facts and getting things right in a certain setting or time or about a certain person when I'm reporting a story. And with historical fiction, you really have to do that with time. So, when my character at one point in the book, she runs into the bathroom because she's so upset that this is in the prologue, so I'm not giving anything away, but her fiance is breaking up with her first fiance. And she's reaching for a breath mint, and she can't reach for certs. She can't reach for a lifesaver. Like, I have to find out, what is she reaching for? And what she's reaching for is Sen breath spray, which are like these little squares that they would chew on, And, when she has a headache, it's a glass bottle of aspirin that she's taking down. It's not plastic. And all these little things matter in terms of bringing the reader deeper into the time period. There's a point where she's in the Hamptons and she's in Southampton and she's looking up at the bookshop, and it's Keen's Books, which was the famous bookshop that was there back then. And what are the titles that are in the window? I have to know exactly what was for sale that summer. And it was Jack Kerouac's On the Road. And there was a new novel by Daphne du Maurier. Am I going to say her name,
Yeah.
butcher her name? Yeah. That was like the big hot book of summer. So, when they're walking through the party to go approach Arthur Miller and Marilyn Monroe that first night or second night they're there, it's Buddy Holly. That'll be the day that's playing, on the from the band. Actually, it's not even a DJ. It's the band live playing, So it's all those little details really, really matter when you're writing historical fiction.
No, they make it such a vivid read too. I was just talking to one of my colleagues and she was like, "Oh, I loved On Gin Lane. It's the perfect summer reading book."
Oh,
I totally agree. We do have a few questions from some readers. So one person
Great.
said, I feel like I can ask the questions that I was going to ask, but also if people are asking, you may as well.
Yeah, totally.
So Sandy says, do you have plans to write another novel set during this time frame?
That is such a good question. And I love talking about this because you'll be surprised to know that I'm moving a little bit forward in time, not too much. But my next book takes place in 1960. It's a dual timeline. So it takes place in 1967 and 1977. And I picked that time period, those two time periods for a couple of reasons. But first, I'll just say quickly, it's about two friends who meet in 1967, and it's about a secret they keep. And it is also set out in the Hamptons in that time. I wasn't ready to leave, which is really funny. I just was like, because my first book was set, we didn't say this, but my first book was set on Martha's Vineyard. So as soon as I finished On Gin Lane and I was picturing this next book, I just knew I wasn't ready to go. I had uncovered so much fascinating research when I was interviewing people, historians, and people who grew up out there and summered out there, that I saved some of it for another book because it was just too good. But I picked those time periods because my parents were out in the Hamptons in the mid 70s and they met out in Montauk. And, I don't remember 1977. I was only 2 years old, but Star Wars had opening night at the Bridgehampton Drive-In that year. It's actually a really fun time to go back to. It's a little more in my wheelhouse, even though I can't totally remember it. I remember enough. And 1967 I love because it's kind of the beginning. It's really not the beginning of the tumultuous times. They started much earlier in the 60s, but it's just really interesting to see the way some people were in the Hamptons, using the Hamptons as a microcosm, how some people were really swept up in the hippie movement and, the bohemian movement and just kind of rebelling against their parents and society. And some people just weren't, I remember my parents were kind of more of the hippie type. But I remember talking to my friends' parents as I got older, always just so curious, the young journalist in me, and just being shocked that some of them were like, so straight laced and didn't
Still living
even
in the 50s.
Still living. Yeah. I almost want to say they were wearing saddle shoes, but they weren't. But you know what I mean? It was as though that side of America didn't even happen for them. And I always thought that was so interesting that you could live in that time period and be young and not be swept up. And so my characters, one is and one isn't. And that's partly why.
And when you shift time periods, I'm sorry, I got cut off, so I hope I'm not repeating anything. But when you shift time periods, is there anything that makes it easier or harder to write when you're looking at a new era versus, the 50s?
You know what? It really was. That's such a good question because I was suddenly in a whole new, it was like I was listening to all different music. That's the one thing I can say because I listen to music a lot when I write, and I was suddenly listening to the Rolling Stones instead of Buddy Holly. It was like I was listening to Elton John's Yellow Brick Road on repeat to write some of the more emotional scenes because that's what they were listening to in the 70s. And I found that I was sort of reinvigorated in my writing a bit in writing the third one because I had spent so much time in the 50s in On Gin Lane, which I adored. But as a writer, you're always looking to explore new things and do new research and, kind of inspire yourself. And so being in this new time period and placing some of these types of characters that I love that are in both books in this time was great fun because it was just it was growing with them into a new time period,
Susie has a question, and she asks, who was your favorite character to write?
Oh, that's such a good question. So I think as a writer, I just love so many of my characters. I think Everly was my favorite to write because I think I had to, when it's your main character, you have to dive in so deep and get to know them so well. And I really grew to care and really adore her as a person and understood her deeply. But my favorite character was probably Starling. And Starling is kind of an Annie Leibovitz type, wise old photographer who has a gallery showing in East Hampton the summer that I'm writing about. And Everly, through a series of events, begins to work with her a little bit, and they develop a very, very close friendship. Starling is somebody who is living in kind of she's living more of a rebellious lifestyle, estranged from her family, just working as a photographer. And she hasn't spoken to her daughter, who's in her 20s, for quite a while. And Everly's somebody whose mother really, because she's been in and out of the mental institution, as close as she is with her and as much as she loves her, she's sort of seeking out a mother figure of her own, and certainly someone who can show her a different model of womanhood. And so the two of them really begin to lean on each other through the summer in very unexpected ways. And I loved writing those scenes. I loved all of these scenes with Starling because I just felt like I really could understand why they needed each other as a writer, right? We just get so deep into it. And I'm not giving anything away, but there's a part at the end where they're simply just saying goodbye. And every time I read that scene, it's almost embarrassing because I wrote it, but I get choked up because I really can feel the power between them. And I know as people how much they meant to each other. So I would say those were definitely my two favorites.
And those are two very different characters. Do you associate with one or the other? One more so than another?
It's a really good question. So I think that I'm somewhere right in the middle, right? So there's this scene in the book where Everly wakes up and she's been given an opportunity by Starling, this photographer, to try out this art colony camp just for the night. So she goes for the night and she's sort of figuring out, what am I going to do with my life? Am I going to, take this traditional route of having, getting married and having kids, or should I do something a little more like Starling and just follow my passion for photography and be more of an artist? And she wakes up in this very rickety cabin and she kind of hears like the squeak of the mattress next door of the artist there. And she can hear two of the artists outside talking. And it sort of dawns on her that she's something in between, right? She wants to be the mother. She wants to, get married. She doesn't want to be so, move so far away from tradition, but she wants something more. There's a longing inside of her that she sort of thinks to herself, well, maybe I can somehow not have it all, because we all know that we're all struggling as moms to have it all, right? But just something more. And I think in her time, with the mindset that women had in that time, that was pretty outrageous, right? That was enough to feel like she was a rebel of her time, because she's saying to herself, I'm going to do it a little bit differently than the women all around me. Then my best friend Whitney is doing it, right? And that took a lot of courage. So to answer your question, I'm right in the middle. I'm a mom who loves being a mom, and I tried really hard to be a good wife and, good to my family, but I wanted more too, and I think some of that storyline that's in the book is me kind of working through some of that myself and saying to myself, it's okay to want more. It's okay to want to follow your creativity and passion. And still have these other things.
It's amazing that this is such a forever topic, because from 57 to now I feel like very little has changed. I would love to know like how you decided to make her a photographer. I'd love for you to talk about sort of Lee's photography passion and why you decided on that.
Yeah, I know. It's a really good question. So I guess I should start by thinking back to even just being in journalism. So I was a magazine journalist for so long. And when you're in, and it's true even with newspapers, but even more so with magazines, you work very closely with photographers to tell a story. So when I would write these long form journalism articles, 6,000 to 8,000 words, I would accompany the photographer many times to help frame the shoot. And what I mean by that is not pose someone or tell them, you got to look like this, for the picture. It was more capturing the true essence of what I was trying to capture in the story, capturing that in the subject. So I've always really been interested in the way photographs can really tell a story. And one of the things my photographer friend at Washingtonian, Matthew Warden, used to do is he used to call it shooting from the hip. So he would take his camera, and as soon as whoever he was taking pictures of, as soon as he lowered his camera, they would just relax and they wouldn't be so like rigid and stiff and uncomfortable in front of the camera. And he would just lower his camera to his hip, but he would keep shooting and he would just keep talking to them like he was doing nothing. And he always would say he would get the best photos. And he actually took the photos at my wedding. And our favorite photographs are the ones where we stopped doing this and he caught us when he shot from the hip. So that definitely made its way into the book. So I started reading when I knew I kind of just had a sense I wanted her to be a photographer. It was just a gut instinct that I thought it would work. And then I started reading about, reading photographers talk about what they love about it and why they do it. I was just in a little library actually out on the North Fork while my kids were in the children's section. And I was kind of flipping through these books. And so many of them, or not so many, but at least one or two, talked about how photographs are really amazing because they uncover a truth, right? I imagine immediately like the famous close-up of the Ben Bradley, the former editor-in-chief of the Washington Post, like showing every pore. Remember when those photographs were really a thing in magazine journalism, and they were really incredible because you could kind of see into the soul of the person being featured. But the other thing they talked about in these books is the way photographs could also tell a lie. And that was the part I immediately latched onto. So Everly in my book is somebody who every year her parents would hire a photographer and they would dress up in their beautiful, velvet dresses at Christmas. She and her mother, and her dad in a suit, and they would be posing, very formally. And they would have these pictures framed in her house. But she would look at them and say, but what family is that? Because that perfect family is not the family that I know. It's like we can all think about those like Sears portraits from the 70s, right? Like capturing all these families. But, in her mind, their family photograph told a lie. It didn't tell the truth. And so I thought for this particular character, it was really well suited that she would love photography because she could see the way it could tell two stories. And so she becomes really fascinated by that, even in the course of the summer when she's shooting all around town. So
I really wish I could see the photos that she takes because I'm sure they would be amazing.
Amazing, yeah.
Let's see, I don't think I asked this one yet. Barbara says, what was the deepest rabbit hole you went down when researching this book?
Oh my goodness, that's so funny because there's so many. I would say I definitely spent a lot of time looking at the clothes. There
was also another question about the clothes. So lots of people would like to know about this.
That's so funny. Okay. So I definitely would just kind of look at, so a lot of the clothes then you can definitely find photographs in magazines on, when you Google and all that. But there's a lot of McCall's patterns. There's a lot of patterns that you could make the clothes from. So that's a lot of what I would look at is just what people even would be sewing themselves at home, and these dresses, with the collars and the belts and the skirts with the pleats and the heels and out at the beach, they're wearing, espadrilles and the straw hats, just like we're wearing today. So some of it hasn't changed. But I think one of the other rabbit holes I went down is just the advertising. So I have to, when I'm writing historical fiction, you have to really write the mindset of the time, right? So I could have a character, I might think my character would be thinking one way, but I have to actually put her in the context of 1957 and what she was raised thinking, what her values are, and how advertising was speaking to her. And advertising is so helpful because, the stuff that is kind of made fun of and memes are made of is actually real. It's stuff that like you found in Cosmo, there was actually an article in Cosmo that I just flagged because I was like, this can't be real. And it was like how to please your husband when he returns home. And it was like light a fire, rub his feet. These were like in the magazines. You're like, this can't be real because to us now it feels like hysterical, right? But this was Everly's world. This was my character's world. And there was this one ad that I thought was so fascinating because it was for Budweiser. And it was this woman and this man, and they were drinking. They had these beautiful coupe glasses with like a gold rim in the ad, and they were toasting their Budweiser in it. And it had some language of some sort that I'm not going to remember about, just treat him tonight, And I just thought it was so great because that's Everly's world. Like she would be somebody who would see the coupe glasses in Hildreth's in Southampton and think to herself, oh my God, like let me buy this and some Budweiser and I'm going to serve it to Roland tonight, you know? And I feel like so that rabbit hole really sucked me in, and that scene actually does make it into the book where they drink, but beer out of coupe glasses. So yeah, so some of those rabbit holes that you fall into and you think, oh my God, that was a day of writing where I just like researched, actually are so helpful because they always kind of sneakily find their way into the book.
And they make it ring true. Like
Yeah,
it
totally.
feels so authentic because you know that it's based on something that
that really was.
Really do you think the Budweiser tasted better out of the coupe glasses?
I think it must have, because I mean they didn't have craft beer then, so they did what they used what they had.
When you were mentioning the clothes too, I think I remember you telling me at some point some of the research you did on the laws, especially surrounding women's clothes.
Oh yes, yes.
Was
very different.
Very
I'm glad
different.
you reminded me of that, because in Southampton they had a dress code back in the summer of 1957, or in just the 50s in general. And one woman I interviewed, so you had to wear a cover up that covered your entire body down to the knee. And you had to even be careful what you wore to the store. So one woman I interviewed said her mother went to the market in Southampton to pick up groceries. And when she got there, she was wearing some hot pants, like shorts and blouse, and she got out of the car and she went to go into the market, and on the sidewalk the policeman stopped her and said, ma'am, you're gonna have to go home and put on some clothes, otherwise I'm gonna have to give you a ticket. Which is just so hard to imagine right now when people are dressing very tasteful in Southampton. I'm not saying they're not, but you certainly see sheer beach cover-ups and pretty Roberta Roller Rabbit things walking down the street where you can see things underneath. So it's funny to imagine that.
Wild.
Yeah.
Hi, all. I'm just going to jump in here. Thank you so much for an incredible discussion. I can't believe that the time's already up. Before we go, I just want to give one last reminder that you can still post a question in the comment section to be entered to win our Anjin Lane sweepstakes. Our next book club favorites pick will be Tom Parada's Tracy Flick Can't Win. So you can join our Facebook group to follow along, or on Instagram for the latest updates. And finally, Brooke, Hannah, and Lauren, thank you so much for joining us. Please make sure that you're following Brooke on Facebook and Instagram so you can learn more and see any updates about any upcoming books. And I hope everyone has a lovely afternoon. Thank you all so much.